Hello, everyone. We're going to give it a few minutes here for more people to join. Really looking forward to getting this started. Eric, one thing I've been wondering about, do you ever consider yourself to be, a mini celebrity in the space of lead gen?
I don't consider myself to be a mini anything, to be clear. But no, look, I mean, I enjoy decent renown, I would say. I'm quasi well known. But the truth is that I just provide as much information as I can. And the fact that that's kind of percolated out there and people now kind of look to me as some sort of, I don't know, not just a provocateur, which I certainly am, but also some form of a thought leader. I mean, it's a nice thing.
Right. No, the reason I asked is the other time at LeadsCon, I got stopped by someone saying, "Oh, hey, I see you everywhere at all these webinars," and and they were like, "Can I take a picture with you?" And I'm like, it was kind of strange, but funny and interesting at the same time. And over a period of time, I guess as we, are around the space and enough people see you, everybody gets to know each other. But it was just funny to be, at least for me, to be feeling like a celebrity in a certain kind of way.
I like what you did there, Nima. You started off complimenting me, but then it boomeranged and it was complimenting yourself. So that's very well executed. Good job. That's how you promote, folks. But look, Nima, you are worlds more famous than I am, right? I'm just a humble, lawyer, a humble purveyor of TCPA knowledge. You are the CEO of what Lead Gen's #1 dialer platform. So pretty cool.
No, I think at the end of the day, like you said, thought leadership and really doing what we can to help as much as possible, right, and work with each other and make each other successful is what it's all about. To be more on a serious note, well, let's see, we got a few more people coming in here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, before we get into introductions, today, we're going to talk about a very important topic, or a combination of things in terms of ad fraud, which leads to fraudulent leads, of course, and it's something I don't think we talk about enough. So as much as I say I'm always excited to talk about today's topic, this one especially I really am. I think there's a lot to be said that is not said or people just don't know about. So going deeper into that, and then of course the latest in TCPA regulations and rulings, there's always something going on. No matter when you're talking about it, it's always ever evolving and changing. And then, we're going to talk about supporting compliance in your dialing and lead conversion process. So I am Nima Hakimi, the CEO and co-founder of Convoso. We're an outbound dialing platform designed to get you the highest contact rate on your leads and doing it in a compliant manner. Rich, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Eric.
Sure. I'm Rich Khan, CEO and co-founder of Anura Solutions. We developed a solution that actually identifies fraudulent visitors in real time. So what's happening is we'll talk about it today about what's going on in the space and what people know or don't want to know, but at least you're going to hear how it all works.
And then I'm Eric Troutman, better known as the Czar of the TCPA. Of course, I run TCPAworld.com, where you can get every case broken down every single day. Also a lawyer, I think, of some repute, at least on occasion. I pretend to be an attorney doing complex federal court litigation, defending all of you who are getting yourselves in trouble out there, and also providing, of course, compliance advice and assistance when you need to go and talk with the FCC or to Congress to make some sense of the law. I help with that too. And I work for something called the Troutman firm, which is a brand new firm I just created.
Indeed, check it out, guys. Eric is really, at the end of the day, has been doing this for a long time. We'll talk more about it and have you guys ask some questions at some point. So before we really jump into it, we'd like to ask you guys 2 questions. If you guys could take this poll on the first one being your biggest frustrations with your current dialer, and you can check all that apply. I know sometimes there are one or multiple issues, but we would love to get your feedback on what your current frustrations are, biggest ones with your current dialer. So we could just take a few seconds here to answer that. That would be really, really appreciated. And also some things to note, you will be getting a recording after this. So if you can also take a survey at the end of the webinar, that would be great. We're also going to be doing some Q&A at the end of the webinar. Give about 10 minutes or so to do that. Ask any and all questions that you have. We would love to address as many of them as possible. So the second poll is just understanding from you guys, how many leads are saying something along the lines like, hey, we didn't fill out this form, or they're just impossible to reach. Would love to know what that looks like, or maybe you just don't know. So either way, let us know how often you see that scenario happening. All right. Let's take a look. All right, not surprised. I am not surprised ever by the results. Looks like it continues to be a challenge in terms of caller ID flagging and reputation, which obviously leads to a low contact rate. I'm very curious to see what the second one, what the answer was to the second one. Let's take a look. All right. Wow.
Wow.
Kind of what I've expected.
Not good.
No, I mean, that is, I never really thought about it to see what it would look like. So it's very interesting to see the percentages and being that high. All right, so let's kick things off a bit. So disclaimer here that, what we're going to give you guys. Eric, why don't you just start us off and tell us about this, since you are the guy.
The disclaimer?
Yes.
Look, not legal advice, folks. Don't watch a webinar and think you have all the answers. Watch a webinar, get some information, inform yourselves a little bit, get yourself oriented, and then go talk to some legal counsel to the extent you need it. Cool?
Thanks. All right, so we're gonna just jump right into this. To kick things off, hand it over to you, Eric. There's a lot going on, and as the TCPA czar himself, why don't you tell us about the things going on right now in the world of TCPA, and why is it important that we talk about this topic right now as of this moment?
Wow. Okay. So look, let's first just orient and level set. Let's remember that the TCPA remains the biggest litigation cash cow in the history of our country. We think about litigation abuse all the time, recognize that more class actions are brought under the TCPA, more multi-millionaire plaintiffs lawyers have been made under the TCPA than under any other statute in our nation's history. All right. So when we think of lawsuit abuse, we have to think of TCPA as the #1 culprit. But it's not just abuse, right? It's the sheer volume of litigation that is brought under the statute. And the reason is twofold, and it's pretty obvious. One, because there's a lot of phone calls being made, right? So there's a lot of conduct that's being regulated, a lot of conduct that can lead to lawsuits. And on the other hand, because there's a ton of money in it, $500 per call, 4-year statute of limitations. We know that class actions are enabled. And so these lawsuits can be in the billions and billions of dollars. I mean, just think about how many calls you've made over the last 4 years. And so what this combination has created is an extremely sophisticated, extremely advanced plaintiff's bar, right? These are not your typical consumer lawyers who are lazy and don't know how to litigate a case. These guys, by and large, I mean, they're very, very intelligent lawyers. They're frankly, they're monsters, some of these guys. And they just crush ordinary firms, ordinary lawyers, even at big firms. They get crushed all the time. I mean, these cases get certified constantly. And the #1 place now that these cases have evolved, right, and I'm talking substantively, is when you look at leads. And that's why the czar spends so much time talking to lead generators, right, and talking to lead buyers, because many of my clients are lead buyers. In fact, at this point, at this moment, my career has evolved to a point where the largest portion of my portfolio are lead buyers who are trying to make outbound calls, right, direct to consumer marketing calls. Obviously, they only want to talk to actual people who actually want to get their goods, right? That's why they're making calls. My clients aren't making calls because they want to harass people. They want to talk to people who are interested in what they are selling. That is the only reason they're making this outreach. And they, my clients, the buyers, right? They turn to professionals, people who call themselves professionals, people who are performance marketers and who are social media types and digital marketers, people who promise to provide leads. And when we talk about leads, we're not just talking about, in many instances, right, some data set with some intent trigger. I mean, somebody who actually has provided express written consent on a web form. And that is supposed to be provided to my clients, who are, again, the buyers. And they're supposed to be able to rely on that. Now, look, there's a lot of tricky pieces in here because we know the law keeps evolving. And we're not really going to talk too much about the law as such, because what we're dealing with right now is a phenomenon of conduct, right? And the conduct, of course, is this lead fraud thing we're going to get to. But continuing to set the stage, I get it. It's hard to know sometimes whether or not express written consent form is sufficient, because we've got cases like Berman coming out that keep moving the bar in terms of what is a proper web form submission. You've got the Troutman 9, right, for your express written consent disclosure. Hopefully you all have that from TCPA World. I provide a free template, folks, free template for what your disclosure should look like. But with cases like Berman, of course, you have to look more at the format. So that's a whole issue, right? Whether or not your consent is even sufficient under the current standard of the TCPA. But, you know, that is a risk. But the larger thing that is driving a ton of litigation right now, again, what I'm seeing in my own personal portfolio is the largest single driver of class action litigation I'm seeing are claims, not saying it's true, claims of lead fraud. And lead fraud, as Rich will tell you here in a second, right? It can take a bunch of different kind of angles. But whatever form of lead fraud we're talking about, where you've got a consumer who says, I didn't provide my consent. It wasn't me. I wasn't the one that went on that website. That is a huge, huge issue for my clients who are, again, who are the buyers of these leads. And yes, obviously these provisions are going to have indemnity provisions, right? The liability is going to flow downstream, but the Anthony Peronics of the world, right? The wolf of the TCPA, he was on my podcast, right? Just 2 weeks ago. And he said, yeah, look, you can have all the indemnity you want and you can go and sue those lead suppliers all you want. But at the end of the day, I'm suing you, the buyer, right? And that's what makes lead fraud such a horrible, horrible situation for folks in the TCPA world, because the folks, by and large, that are making the outbound calls are either the lead aggregators who have bought a data set, or, you know, as I'm more interested in, the buyers, right? The folks who are actually attempting to sell goods and services direct to consumers, who are receiving those data leads or even those warm transfers, who believe this is absolutely a legitimate transfer of information for a customer that wants my product, only to find out that that might not be the case. And, you know, the wolf of TCPA world told us directly, like, I don't care. I'm gonna sue you anyway, right? And that is the big issue. The incentive, right, for the creation of a fraudulent lead is 100% downstream. It's on the individuals who are creating these leads and who are getting paid, right, regardless of whether or not that lead converts. Yet the risk that's being posed by that conduct is 100% on the lead buyer, right, who has no incentive for fraud, who only wants the truth, if you will, whose only benefit is if this is really a valid lead, and they're paying the money for that solution, for that product. And what do they get? They get all the risk from a fraudulent lead. So the bad guys get money and get away with it, which is why this phenomenon keeps going on. The good guys have to pay for it, and then they have to pay for it again because now they're holding the risk. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And again, under the TCPA, where you're talking about $500 per call and very sophisticated plaintiffs counsel on the other side, you can't afford to have even a tiny sliver of this fraud in your portfolio if you are a buyer. Like, any portion of your portfolio that is fraud is unacceptable. It has to be unacceptable to you because the margins are such that you can get crushed. Even if 1% of your calls are fraud, if the plaintiff can find those, you're in a ton of trouble, just a ton. Well, so that's kind of the level setting of the background and how the TCPA plays into this, because again, it has to be driven home that your good faith, right, when you're making an outbound call using certain prohibited regulated technology, your good faith belief that this is a legitimate lead will not save you. That is not a defense. Now, in the DMCA context, it can pose a defense if you have policies and procedures in place. We can talk about that. But using regulated technology, I'm talking pre-recorded calls. I'm talking about automatic telephone dialing systems, which again are not as narrow as people think after Facebook. If you're using that technology and you are using that to contact a consumer who did not give consent, it doesn't matter even if you believe in your heart that this was a real lead and you were calling it properly, you have to have some protection in place to make sure that you're not contacting fraudulent leads. And oh, by the way, it's a bit of a pivot. Hang with me. I know, Nima, you've got a question or two here to follow up. I just want to say, if you are a lead buyer, right, and you find fraud, I'm not talking about somebody slipped up. I'm not talking about one of these scumbag litigators, right, slipped through the silo. I'm not talking about that. I mean fraud. Like you find out that they were using a bot. You find out they were using a click farm. You find out they were buying data and passing it on. It was age data and they said it was a new lead. You got to cream these people. Like you got to cream these people. These people cannot exist in our ecosystem. It has to be made clear that there will be no acceptance of this, and not even like a little tiny bit, right? I know I talked to a lot of folks that say, well, you know, most of my leads are good, but we pepper the steak a little bit here and there. Like you hear that, these people have to be cut. They got to be tarred and feathered. And Rich, you know, in my opinion, there ought to be some publicity around who these people are and what they're doing. I know, you know, we got to tread a little carefully there, but from my perspective, these people have to be thrown out of our industry. Okay, that's my spiel. Nima, follow-up questions, thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, and I want to ask Rich the same thing, right? But this is something that this has been a big problem. And from your perspective, you know, I know some of the answers, but I want to know, why is it not being talked enough about, or why is this something that, you know, we know about, but not enough is maybe being done about it? Like, why do you think those reasons are?
Well, it's one of only two things, right? One possibility, which I adhere to, is that maybe it's not as big a problem as some would like it to be. So the plaintiff's bar, right, is crying about this constantly. They're saying, you know, half of all the leads are fraudulent, blah, 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 right? I've looked at these and from, you know, to my eye, in my personal experience, I've only seen a small handful that were actually fraudulent. And believe me, I went after those guys with a machete when I found that out. But most of these cases that I'm involved with, the claims of fraud, are still being brought by litigators, right? These are scumbags. They're setting up their own claim. And so, you know, a lot of the noise around fraudulent leads is just noise. And so I think a lot of people are kind of putting their fingers in their ears because of that reality. On the other hand, though, right, that this noise that is being generated out there is being used as a cloak for some, right, to put this on and say, well, there's not really fraud out there. It's all litigators, while they're secretly actually doing some fraud, right? So it's a really interesting kind of like self-fulfilling thing where there's an echo chamber, I feel like, in the lead gen space where everyone's talking about litigators, 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 litigators. Some of that is based on truth because the litigators are doing scumbag things. Some of that is just essentially allowing them to get away, them meaning the lead generators, getting away with a little bit of fraud themselves and then justifying it essentially by saying, oh, as long as we get the litigators out of here, you know, everything's okay. But from my view, and I've said this on the record, I'll keep saying it, the litigators are fraudsters and they're bad and they should be put in jail. But you know what? So are the lead generators who are creating fraudulent leads. Now, I don't care if 95% of your leads are good, but you're just putting a little bit in there because you need your revenue numbers up this quarter. No, it's not acceptable. It is fraud. It's the same sort of thing that the litigators are doing. And you're not going to find any shelter from me, no matter which side of the fraud you fall on. It's fraud.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. All right, do you want to add more to this before we get to Rich?
Well, let's just talk real quick about the TCPA at a high level, just so we can recall the rules, because I think it's useful to have those in hand, right? The TCPA, as far as the folks listening to this podcast are going to care about, governs two primary areas, right? Number one is the use of regulated technology, ATDS, pre-recorded voice, ringless voicemail, right? Text messages, if they're not sent using human selection, to a cell phone. Right? If you're using any of those technologies, you have to have express written consent for marketing, right? That's the rule. That's why this fraud thing is so important, because you might think you're complying because everybody wants to have that express written consent, right? That is your golden ticket. It's what helps you no matter what the evolution of ATDS is. As we know on TCPAworld.com, we've got the Facebook ruling resource page where we break down every single ATDS case post-Facebook. We know the case law is still evolving, right? No one really knows for sure what is and isn't an ATDS, which is why express written consent is so important, right? And that's why good compliant companies like my clients that are buyers of leads want that express written consent, the real deal, that golden ticket. And that's why, again, fraud is so pernicious. It's terrible. These companies that want to comply, that want to do it right, are getting torched in the one thing that is supposed to give them protection, right? Their refuge, this express written consent, is turning into, it's turning into ash in their mouth. What's that old quote? Your joy will become ash in your mouth from Game of Thrones. It's a great quote. But that's literally what these fraudulent leads are. They're something that looks like something so good and it ends up being something so bad. And then, so that's one piece of the TCPA. And of course, the other piece is numbers on the DMC, right? And when you're calling a number on the DMC for marketing purposes, it does not matter whether or not you are using regulated technology. So even if you're using, Safe Select, even if you're being very, very cautious and using a very manual system, if you're calling a number on the DMC, you still have to have either that established business relationship or, of course, express written consent. And I can tell you after Facebook, this won't be a surprise to anybody, that the plaintiffs bar, by and large, especially with my clients, has completely moved away from ATDS. They're not going to try to argue an ATDS case against the Czar, right? But what they are doing is they are trying to still bring these pre-recorded call cases and these DMC cases, right? And again, they're leveraging the lead fraud argument, not saying it's true, because there's a lot of litigated fraud out there, again, but they're leveraging the lead fraud argument to enable a pre-recorded call class or a DMC class, because obviously you're going to reach out to these folks more than twice in a 1 year period. And if that express written consent is invalid, well, again, not only do you lose your ability to use regulated technology, you also lose your ability to even dial manually if that number is on the DMC. So either one of these kinds of claims are being enabled right now. Again, I'm seeing just a ton of these. And the courts, increasingly are crediting, this is, one further important takeaway, the courts are crediting a plaintiff who says, under penalty of perjury, right, signs a declaration that says, I did not go to bobsleadshack.com on June 5th, right? And the courts are saying, look, that's an issue for the jury. So if you get stuck in one of these cases, my lead buyer friends, you know how this works, right? You're going to have to get through not just the pleading stage, probably you're going to sort of have to get past the MSJ phase, meaning that the case is going to go all the way to the jury before you can win that case. That is how pernicious, that is how dangerous, how sticky, how challenging these lead fraud cases can be, which is why, again, I told you from the start, you cannot tolerate even a 1% fraud rate in your portfolio. There can be none. And so you have to look to tools, technologies, and vendors. Hey, Rich, how you doing? What do you do for a living?
Thanks for the intro. But yeah, so going along with that, I sit on a different end of it. I see actually leads being processed by the minute. And we're looking at things and markers that the average person's not looking at. We're looking at over 800 data points to identify what's going on with that lead. So in the case of a click farm, right, we call them human fraud farms. They come along and they're dumb enough, they grab Eric Troutman's information, they pop it into a lead form, say, hey, he's looking to save money on car insurance, and they hide themselves. And what's interesting is by using a human, right, they're able to bypass CAPTCHA, bypass, any type of recording system. So if you're using a Journai or Active Prospect, they're there to make sure you have compliancy and know where the lead, originated from. But at the end of the day, they can't validate who's behind that keyboard. That's our job. Our job is to identify, look at all the data points and find out what's going on. Are they bouncing off of proxy servers? Are they spoofing their device? Are they, a simple example I give that most people understand, simple is somebody comes to a form, filling out Eric Troutman's information, pops it in from an iPhone, we scan that device and realize they don't have a touchscreen. How many people are looking for that type of data, that level of detail? No one is, right? It's not part of any data stack that you're using right now. This is the kind of stuff, the sneaky tricks that they use to get their leads through. In fact, I was in in London, and we were I did a talk on lead generation, and I said 2 simple steps to become a lead, to get into lead generation fraud. And I know our audience here is not looking for that, but this is how easy it is to do it. 1, sign up for an affiliate program, right? So now you're in an affiliate program of, let's say, car insurance. 2, get information. You can get it off the dark web, you can get it off of yellow, white pages, you can get it off of age data leads, depending on where you want to get your data. Step 3, hire a human fraud firm for about $9 an hour around the globe and have them fill out the form going through your affiliate link. That is not going to get caught by anybody except us, because human fraud farms are the hardest to catch. They're doing things in such a way that they're not triggering bot technology. If they're putting captures in front of them, they're getting past them. In fact, most of the even version 3 reCAPTCHA won't pick up on some of them because they're humans, right? Their technology is all about, is it a bot? I noticed when we registered for this form, you guys are using the reCAPTCHA version 3. So you don't even have to solve a puzzle. It's just identifying information, right? And you're using that to protect certain forms. And a lot of people use technology like that. But I ask everybody that I come in contact with, have you actually tested it for accuracy? Do you realize that reCAPTCHA is blocking 10% of real people? So yet a lot of people are trusting technologies without actually testing them, understanding what they do under the hood when they're protecting their forms. And it's protecting their livelihood, their income.
How do you right, figure that out? You say from humans that are actually filling out the form. That's interesting. I mean, like,
there's certain things that they have to do, right? Let's say if I was going to commit fraud, right? And let's face it, these fraudsters that are committing fraud, they know the laws, they know the rules. They're not stupid. They are very intelligent, developers. And when I look at it from around the globe, it's usually organized crime when it comes down to it. That's committing most of this fraud, right? So at the end of the day, they have to hide themselves, right? Because if I did it right from my IP address, quick lookup, exactly it's my office, exactly who did, you can pinpoint the computer based on some basic forensics, and exactly who committed fraud. Now I'm in trouble, right? People like Eric Troutman are gonna want to have my head on a platter. But with a lot of the tools that are on the internet, you can hide yourself, bounce off of different servers, come in, make it look real, maybe bounce off a residential proxy IP address. So I'll bounce off somebody's cable modem, and then spoof your device so it doesn't look like it's coming from the same device each time. And if you do it right, it's very tricky to identify. They land on the page, they fill out the form using fingers, right? They don't use a bot, they finger type it all out, hit submit, and now the data gets checked on the back end because they want to make sure the name matches the email address and phone number, which it does. Goes to the call center because you want to call that lead immediately. You call that lead, 4 major issues just took place, right? I think we talk about this a little later, but we'll get into this now. So 1, you just wasted money on a lead that's never going to convert. So it's a loss of ROI. Number 2, if you're a big brand and you call enough of these, people are going to be concerned about your brand, like where you got your information versus what you're trying to sell. So brand reputation. Number 3, it takes longer to reach somebody who's not expecting your call. So on that survey that we did, where people are having a really hard time connecting to people, that could be not smoking gun, but it could be a sign of fraud. Hard to connect because people aren't expecting the call. And finally, number 4, you don't have express permission to call this person, so you break in TCPA. And that's all happening right at the gate, and very, very tricky to find. And on average, this is what the quote is up here. On average, we're identifying that 25% of every new lead vendor we work with, that's the average.
Wow.
We've caught significantly more and significantly less, depending on how they're managing their back end.
So hang on a second. Oh, so well, I was just going to ask: are you saying people are coming to you that are lead suppliers and they're finding fraud on their own platforms? Like, I don't understand what that 25% means.
Yeah, so 25%. It doesn't matter if it's a lead buyer or a lead seller. Most obviously the people that I work with are trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to make sure the traffic's good, but again, they're not the ones. The lead generators aren't generating the leads themselves directly 100%. They're buying it from Facebook, Google, Microsoft. They're buying it from affiliates. They're buying it from programmatic. They're buying stuff from downstream on areas they're hoping that they can trust. And I don't trust anybody when it comes to identifying whether it's fraud or not, right? You have to do it yourself. You have to have some technology stack in front to know what you're getting. I even wrote an article for Forbes recently that how organic traffic can get you sued. Organic traffic historically has about 5% fraud. because bots are roaming through all that technology, building up social profiles to be able to do their nasty deeds. And in doing so, they will fill out forms. They will make actions look like they're real. And if you pick up and make a phone call on a lead that was submitted by a bot over organic, that's going to get you in trouble. Or I should say, can get you in trouble.
On bots is one thing, right, as far as being able to detect them and whatnot. But what I'm really curious about is how does Anura detect the humans that are doing it? Like that to me is a big question.
Yep.
Would love to know more. Can you share with the audience, like, how do you guys go about doing that?
So humans have a different pattern. Like bots have one style of looking, and that's why there's software that's dedicated to finding bots. We started with the bots, but when we started focusing on the lead generation space years ago and started identifying that there was something else coming through, like why would a human bounce themselves off of a couple different servers, hide their IP address, spoof their environment, make things look different? Like why would they do that? And then we started looking at that stuff. So their job is to try to hide those tracks and make their profile look real. Yet if you know what to look for, the signs are there, right? And what we're looking for is that digital signature of fraud. They're doing something, they're hiding themselves in such a way, such an advanced way, that the average person that you're looking to fill out your form is not doing. And then based on all that analytics, we've done years and years of testing where we've taken, thousands or tens of thousands of leads and then scored them, and then had the call center actually go back and manually score them, line up to make sure that we're accurate. Because one of the big issues in my space is a lot of my competitors have issues with false positives. We'll use reCAPTCHA, for example, because I brought that up before. We had several clients test reCAPTCHA for accuracy, and they were identifying that 10% of the leads that they were saying to block, that they said were fraudulent, were actually real people. Wow. That submitted the information, that wanted the information. And you do that by listening to the call recordings, listen to the questions being asked. Because obviously, if you get on the phone with somebody and they called you and said, hey, Nima, you filled out this form to save car insurance. You're like, yeah, I did. I filled it out about 10 minutes ago. That conversation is real. If reCAPTCHA marked you as a fraudulent visitor, well, that's going to cost who's ever selling and generating that lead money, because it's a lost opportunity. And that's the big issue in the space, is that we talked about this before too. Why do people not want to use this tool like ours, or not know enough about it? Because they're worried that we're going to chop off real income, when honestly, we're focusing on the stuff that's really causing the issue.
So how accurate are you guys in that sense, right? Given that you've seen others who have that issue, like how do you guys get past that that objection?
So the best way we've done this is through client testing, and because clients are going to give us as much information as possible. They're looking to see if we're mismarking real people as fraud. So I'll just give you some numbers. We're scanning about 3 billion visitors every day. And we don't just do lead generation. We do lead generation, performance marketing. We do, gaming. We do a lot of different areas. But right now we're scanning about 3 billion visitors a day. The last time we had a client come to us with an accurate false positive where we mismarked, and it was literally 2 transactions, was last summer.
Can I pause you, Rich?
Yeah.
3 billion?
3 billion.
3 billion what?
Visitors. Where? Visitors.
3 billion visitors to what?
It's a variety of different sites. We have ad networks in our place. We have gaming systems. We have sweepstakes. We have a lot of big volume players. We have some in the programmatic space where they're doing billions of visitors of impressions. So when you start to add all that up, that's where our numbers right around that 3 billion mark right now. And we use all that.
I guess you're global, right? You got to be, in order to get to 3 billion. I mean, you've got to have saturated China, India, Russia. I mean, think about that.
We see them all.
Billion. Yeah, interesting.
Wow. So what would be some questions, right, to ask your lead generators, wherever the leads are coming from? What should you be asking them? What are you looking for? Try to help everyone out in terms of what you've seen work best, because what you don't know, right? So let's go deeper into that.
Yeah. So the first thing I always tell people is obviously vet out your sources, right? You got to know who you're dealing with. And the dirtier of the sources are going to be your affiliates and programmatic. Programmatic, I think, is the largest marketing channel on the internet right now, and it's got about an average of 45% fraud, which is the same as affiliate-based marketing. Affiliate-based marketing averages about 45% fraud. If you're dealing with 45%. So I'll give you a quick scan. So Google, Facebook, 5 to 10%, right? They still have fraud in there. It's 5 to 10% fraud. Microsoft Ads is running around 25%. LinkedIn around 25%. TikTok, Twitter run about 15%. Well, Twitter's different, but TikTok about 15%. You got your native channels all run about 15%, 20% depending on the native channel. Email marketing, I've seen as high as 30%. So each channel has got different levels of fraud. Organic, Google and Facebook are going to be amongst your lower because they're spending money on resources to try to reduce as much of the fraud as possible. There's still stuff in there that's being missed from what we're seeing. And again, our accuracy when we identify fraud, we have actually put a number on it. We just went greater than the 5 nines accuracy, so greater than 99.999% accuracy. Nothing's perfect. I don't want to say it's perfect, but based on historical data, that's where we're coming up against. But yeah, so if the first thing I would do is have them understand where they're buying their traffic from. And 9 times out of 10, and when I talk to somebody, they have good relationships. They've gone out to dinner with all their sources. They have good relationships, which is great. Where do each of their partners get their traffic from? And how well do they know them? And that goes layers deep, because usually when we find the fraud, it's not their direct source that's committing the fraud, right? It's the person behind them, where they're actually getting their traffic from, because they don't do a great job vetting it out. You know, somewhere along the line, someone's not doing their job and vetting it out, or using some type of technology to help them vet out the traffic. And that's where everybody gets in trouble. Because you think, if I have a good relationship with my source, he's not going to try to screw me. I even had a conversation with a guy. He says, hey, you found 40% fraud on a given source. I said, okay. He says, he was my college roommate. Is he trying to screw me? The answer is no, he's not. But where he gets his traffic from is screwing him, which in turn is screwing you.
I disagree. I think the answer is yes. I think he's either trying to screw you or he just doesn't care if he screws you or not. Right?
He just doesn't know a lot of the time. Like up until this call, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, Rich, let me just say, I'm not sure I believe that there's 45% fraud in the affiliate space. But let's assume you're right for a second. You gotta know, right? You gotta know. Like if you're selling, if 45% of what you're buying is fraud and you don't know, you shouldn't be in this business, man. Like is my
affiliate stuff. I mean, it depends, right? The price and the lead cost could be so low that people just don't care enough, or they don't look into it enough. So you just don't care.
Hey, you're just closing your eyes. You're just choosing not to care, right?
What
like
happens a lot of times is smart pricing, right? So I'm buying traffic from somebody. The conversion rate is much lower than I'm used to. So I'm only willing to pay. I'm paying less for that traffic. And a lot of people that I talk to, like, well, look, if I smart price it and I price it out to what the traffic is worth, I'm okay with it. They're not thinking about all the other potential problems that they're going to run into. They're just, it's a simple fix. Hey, it converts at half, I'll pay half. And if the seller is like, I'll take half, then they continue doing business. But meanwhile, they're creating a lot of potential damage for who's ever picking up and making that phone call. And I try to talk to these people and say, hey, let's solve this problem. Let's use smart pricing to your advantage. Let's get rid of the junk and let's increase the quality of your traffic, so you increase the quality of your network. And that's how we help companies grow. By actually eliminating the fraud, you actually increase the quality of ROI on your traffic that you're selling. Clients see a lift in ROI, they spend more money with you, and that's the growth that you're looking for.
So then as we talk about that, right, and we're talking about cleaning up the top of the funnel essentially and having more quality versus quantity, let's talk a little bit about that aspect of it, which then comes on to the technology and the call center side of things. I want to talk a little bit about how that impacts things, because like you said, it's an effect that goes on, you know, downstream that nobody pays attention to. Great, you're paying less for your leads, they're converting at a certain rate that you're happy with, but guess what? A lot of things have changed over the past year, 2 years, that will have an impact on your overall operation if you don't fix this problem that we're talking about, right? So the first one being with the Trace Act that was signed, it required telco carriers to implement a framework called Stir Shaken, which then requires everybody to verify the identity of the person who is making the calls. And that's something that's being passed down to everybody, all the way down to your dialer provider. Essentially, what we have to do as a company is we have to vouch for our customers who are making the calls to say that, hey, you know what, we know who this company is, we know who's making this call, so that we can give you an A-level attestation rating to make sure that these calls go through and get completed. And that means we need to know who you are as a company, what you're doing, what the purposes of the calls are. There's a whole process that we go through. And the problem is if you're getting these leads that are fraudulent and you're making calls that are going through and you get complaints from people, I mean, it has an effect on your calls being blocked, which is different from stir shaken, right? But if you're just making these calls, now people are going to complain about it. Your contact rates are not going to be up if people are not expecting your call. You're going to be bundled in with these bad actors, essentially, where you're making too many calls to get contacts. And as we know nowadays with the call blocking and call flagging, right, when you're making too many calls and there's not enough answers or there's certain patterns, you start getting flagged and blocked. So you want to be responsible about what kind of leads come through in the first place. And when they do, you don't have to over dial them, right? Like when you have good quality leads, you need to make less dials to get the contact rate up, to be able to have a higher conversion rate at the end of the day, so that you don't fall into that net with the bad guys. So that's an aspect that you want to take a look at. You want to also look into incorporating other channels of communication, not just calling your leads. We talk about this plenty of times, but if you have a good quality lead, one of the first things that you should be doing is either send them a text message when that form gets filled out, right? Immediately try to send a text message letting them know, hey, thank you for filling out the form on abcinsurance.com. We're going to give you a call here in a few minutes, or finding out when they're available, or trying to call them first, and if there's no answer, have the ability to send them a text message. So you want to get a little bit smarter about the you could say strategy that you're using, along with not just calling your leads over and over, because that's what happens when you have low quality leads or fraudulent leads. You're going to be dialing, over dialing, and over dialing in hopes that there's an answer and somebody's picking up the phone, and it's not a strategy that works any longer. So the fact that, Rich, you're saying, look, 45% of affiliate traffic leads to fraudulent leads, I mean, that's massive. And I would say if you can fix the problem up top, then everything else around your operation in terms of your dialer and getting high contact rates should have an immediate effect. And so you don't need to be dialing your leads like you did in earlier days where you're just pounding it. We still see a lot of companies that say, hey, we just want to call the lead a million times in hopes of getting that answer. That doesn't work anymore. You don't have a choice. You have to do things a smarter way, which is why going smarter, the way you do your call cadences, there are very specific things that we recommend, right? Don't dial them 10 times the first day, right? Try to set up your call cadences where maybe the first day you call them a couple times, the next day you might call them once, then maybe over the next week another time, and then rest it and try for 30 days again, and try something like that where you have the ability to try to get a hold of them again, but not in an aggressive manner. So that's where, a dialer like Convoso has workflow dialing, is what we refer to it, where you can set the cadence of when you want to redial that lead and try it again over a longer period of time without harassing the consumer. Because like Eric, like you said, you want to talk to people and consumers who want to talk to you, and they don't want to be called 50 times to talk to you, right? They're busy, they're doing their thing, they're at work, they're having dinner, whatever the case might be. So you really have to be careful about how you put together that call cadence around how to engage with your consumers and get them on the phone. I'm sure when you talk to people, Eric, that when you talk to them around the call cadences, I don't know what you see, but I would imagine you hear a lot of different strategies that people use. What do you tell them, right? How do you get through to your clients? Because I know they want to be aggressive, I know they want to dial as much as possible, they want to get people on the phone, but how do you get them to change that mindset? Because that's something that we see people struggle with, and the ones that adapt are the ones that do well, and the ones that don't are the ones that end up going out of business.
Yeah, Nima, look, and I'll say this gently. The folks that come to me typically are sophisticated. They've got a good brand, they've got good market share. And when I tell them no more than 5 touches omni-channel in a day, that's the first day, and you start reducing from there, they hear that and they execute, right? Because that's the power of good counsel, obviously. You're in a different position, right? When they go to you, many of these folks aren't armed with attorneys. Maybe they're kind of newer to this game, and they just want to saturation bomb everybody, right? And you know, from a legal perspective, I can't tell you it's necessarily illegal, assuming you've got that express written consent. But is that a good use of your resources? Is that a good contact strategy? Is that good for your brand? I mean, I think the answer to all those questions is pretty obvious.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The brands definitely take it more serious versus, smaller companies. I think they need to take that mindset of a brand, and
right.
As much as they don't have a brand, you want to really position yourself like that with that mindset. And so I would say, as a dialer company, there's 3 things that we recommend to try to wrap this up a bit. 1, have an omni-channel strategy. Like Eric said, if it's 5 touches in one day, make sure they're not all calls, right? Do a combination of calls, text messages, emails. That's one thing. 2, manage your caller ID reputation. This is obviously the biggest challenge. And how do you manage that? Obviously, with Rich and the solution of detecting fraud, you're not calling leads that don't want to be called and consumers that are not interested. So you're not over dialing to then get flagged. 2, register those numbers, make sure they're registered, which is something that we provide and do on your behalf to reduce the chances of them getting flagged. And then just in general, partner with a company that takes compliance serious, right? That looks at the latest changes, works with you to support you as much as possible, because there are a lot of companies out there that don't that look the other way when it comes to compliance. And in 2022, you can no longer do that. It doesn't work. Don't look the other way. It is going to come back and haunt you. You got to have the right team in place, the right legal counsel in place, the right technology solutions in place, and tie that up with overall strategy. And if you're proactive about all of those things, you'll be set up for success. That's really kind of the point that I want to hit home, that some people are still choosing to ignore. But we're in 2022. We're no longer in 2002. Right? That's the bottom line. So I want to leave this last 10 minutes for some Q&A. Really appreciate everybody sticking it through up until this point. I know we can talk about this topic and subject for hours on end. Eric, I know you can talk about this for years on end. And Rich.
Well, I mean, there is something that we ought to acknowledge, in my view, which is, Rich's solution is and solutions like it are critical. But when I hear 45% fraud in channels, you have to understand, folks, that's a failed industry. You have failed. The industry has failed. And if a regulator ever finds that out, affiliate traffic will be banned in this nation. I'm not messing around. Like, it will be banned. There will be no affiliate traffic permitted. Web form submissions will be shut down. It will not exist anymore if these levels of fraud are true. It cannot be that this occurs in a country that receives 10 billion robocalls a month. And Rich and Nima, I've been talking about creating a new trade organization, because obviously the organizations that exist today, I love you guys, but if it's 45% fraud and we're just letting that happen, fail. That's a failure, period, full stop. We need something new. We need something more powerful. We need something with teeth. And I'm telling you right now, if I go to and start this trade organization, which I think I'm going to, represent the buyers, stuff like what Rich has, right? Anura and similar products that detect fraud are going to be required, right? There will be no affiliate traffic with 45%, and we just kind of turn a blind eye and reduce the price and let these calls go. We're talking about 1 billion robocalls a month to American consumers that they don't want or need. We got to prevent that. We can't allow that. And my job, I guess, after this, hearing you, Rich, talk, I'm going to stop it. Hopefully you guys will help me. But let's take some questions, I guess, in the meantime.
Yeah, good point, Eric. Definitely. It's a bigger problem than I think anyone really has looked at.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
So let's take a look here. First question is, how could you get in trouble with a bot if the phone number is invalid or if you have a consent clause in the submission form for an online inquiry?
Well, first off, if it's an invalid number and you make a phone call, it's going to be invalid. Most of these bots and human fraud farms, doesn't matter how they're getting it, they're using real people's information. So again, we'll use Nima as the example. They pick up and call Nima based on a bot that filled out a form that passed all the tests that went undetected, have his real number. They call him and say, hey, we're calling you based on the information you filled out on the form. And he turns around and says, I didn't fill out your form. That's where the issue comes into play. Even if you have a consent at the bottom there, he didn't fill out the form. And that's the problem that's creating, because then he sits down, he hangs up the phone. There's a 6th call I've gotten today of people asking me about car insurance because maybe they resold that lead to, half a dozen other people. And then he's watching TV, it pops up, TCPA, if you got a call that you weren't expecting, let's go sue, and it's that easy. He picks up the phone, makes a phone call, and tries to make a couple bucks out of it, as opposed to being the serial guys that are looking to make, a living off of it. But this is just, Nima got called enough times and got upset enough, he might call one of these quick lawyers online and just say, hey, I just got another call from somebody, it just pissed me off and I need to get this taken care of. So that's how the trouble can start.
Yeah, okay, next question. Let's see, another one for you, Rich. Should we avoid programmatic for now? It says, I believe you said programmatic has the highest rate of fraud, not affiliate traffic.
If you're buying programmatic is a great source because it has such a wide net that you can cast. I highly recommend not going in programmatic without using a solution like ours, because you need to know where the fraud is coming from. Because if what's happened is, any of my programmatic buyers, what they're doing is they're using our technology to identify the actual page that they're showing up on. And we're finding a lot of spoof domains, domains that you think are very trustworthy, but the actual visitor wasn't taken to that domain. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. So we're helping them to identify the actual domains, the SSPs that they're coming from, so they can add them to their banned list and eventually get them off their list. And we're watching their programmatic drop from 45% on down. I'll give you a perfect example. We're a small buyer because our space is very niche-y for the types of terms that we're looking for. And we were buying on Google Display Network, which is programmatic, right? And 55% fraud on Google's Display Network is what we were tracking on our own campaign, using a technology that we use that automatically handles that with Google. Inside of 6 weeks, we're under 10% and falling. So that's the kind of stuff, if you're going to be in that space, programmatic is not cheap. I mean, it can be, but most people are spending a serious amount of money. You need a tool to help you guys identify what you're getting to optimize your ultimate budget.
Yeah. This one, Eric, is for you. This is about the latest in terms of Javier and the whole active prospect scenario, right? And the question is around the recorded monitoring, and should we update our TCPA language to include recording or electronic monitoring?
Yeah, it's not that simple, unfortunately. I'm glad that you brought this up. All right, so Javier, right, new 9th Circuit decision that says the use of web session recording or playback technology like active prospects trusted form and presumably like Drunaya will constitute wiretapping. Wiretapping, isn't that crazy? And the real thrust of Javier is even more crazy, which is, in that case, remember, the defendant who had the website actually did, as you just suggested, question asker, have in their terms and conditions, right, that this is going to be recorded via web session technology, and you agree, right? And they click, yes, I agree. And the court said, because the act of affirming the agreement was itself recorded, the website did not have prior consent to record. Insanity, right? It's like saying, you call somebody and they say, do we have your permission to record this call or recording this call? Like, no, okay. And then suing because they recorded the part where they asked you if they could record you or not, right? That's literally what Javier was about. So not only was active prospect found to be wiretapping, which is crazy, providing consent on the form was found to be insufficient to have consent to begin with. So what you have to do, right, following Javier to the letter, is you have to have consent to record before you start running your web session recording. So how do you do that? Well, one thing you can do at a minimum, you have to update all your terms and conditions. Those little things at the bottom, the browse wrap at the bottom, terms and condition of your website. You at least have to update those to say this is going to be recorded. You agree by continuing to use the website. But I'll tell you, that's probably not going to be enough to some courts. To some courts, that'll be fine, but browse wrap is not always enforceable. So, those horrible cookie barriers that you have to click through in California or elsewhere, do you agree to our cookie policy, whatever, and they put it up on the screen, you can't get to the website until you agree. You kind of have to do that. And so what I'm telling a lot of my clients, and feel free to give me a call, you want to talk this through, is if you have a CCPA policy or protocol where you're popping something specific to California consumers under the CCPA, you want to ride that process, update it to operationalize using the new Javier language that you have to avoid the wiretapping statute, and pop that too. But give me a call. It's actually a fairly complex thing to work through. The Ninth Circuit did us no favors. I happen to think that ruling is a terrible ruling, very, very poorly reasoned. But hey, look, that seems to be a trend in America right now with poorly reasoned decisions. So whatever, don't fight the law, just get smart, understand what it is, and execute on an operational basis to avoid liability.
It's crazy, things are always happening.
You can find out about it on TCPAworld.com, of course. We broke the news of that right away, long analysis, got a couple of different pieces on it. If you're curious, just go to TCPA World and search for Javier, Javier, free content. Enjoy.
A couple other ones before we leave here, trying to wrap it up with. But Rich, is there any documentation, an article, any blog post that kind of explains the procedures, that should be taken in terms of seeing if the leads are, call it fraudulent, healthy or not, or anything that you can point to the audience?
Yeah, actually, if you guys go to Anura.io under our resources, we have a white paper on lead generation fraud, how it's created, what signs to look for, like things people can be doing, and it's a good overall article on that topic.
Awesome. All right, and then lastly, to wrap this up, it says we've been extremely successful finding and stopping fraudulent traffic using a combination of Anura, Trusted Form, and Dronaya. What are some potential other touch points on form-based sites to flag before getting to buyers, such as, for example, the screen size or anything else to be looked at?
Yeah, so that's kind of like a format question. And so you folks really should read the Berman decision. If you haven't, it's like directly applicable to the lead gen space. It actually involved a fluent form, right? It's in the Ninth Circuit. It's an appellate court decision looking at website layout and helping people to understand, because again, there's no standards, right? There's no specific standards out there in terms of how big your phone has to be, where it has to be located, et cetera, et cetera. The Berman case helps you to understand what was required. And the touchstone here that you have to keep in mind is that the consumer can't be tricked into accepting terms, right? That's not how it works. The consumer has to know that by clicking a button, they're doing something of legal significance, that they are accepting a term and condition and essentially forming a contract, because a disclosure is a contract under the law. And what Berman says, in essence, is that if the format is such that the consumer is clicking a button that says, for instance, continue, right? But there's nothing that indicates that by clicking continue that they are forming a binding contract, because again, the word continue doesn't tell you that you're done. It tells you that you're moving toward being done, not that you're done. But again, that contract was formed according to the defendant in that case at that moment. And the court said, no, it wasn't, right? That disclosure was not accepted by clicking that button. So you need to think about things like, what does the button say? Does it say just continue? Or does it say accept terms? Does it say continue with an asterisk or something? Where is your disclosure? Is it above the button, nice prominently displayed? How big is the language, right? And again, until we get this trade organization that I'm thinking of creating to set standards, you don't know. Does it have to be 12-point in black font against a white background, or 8-point in gray against a charcoal background, right? It's not entirely clear. The only thing that you know for sure is you have to make it so that the consumer can see it for sure. You can't be monkeying around here because the Ninth Circuit was very, very clear that that consumer has to know, you know, there's blue hyperlinks, that it has to be close to that button. That button has to say something that indicates that that is going to be an acceptance of terms. So, you know, you kind of throw that into a blender and figure out where you want to land on all these different pieces. But at the end of the day, you got to do something to make sure that consumer knows what they're doing.
Rich, just to wrap this up, I think a little bit on the fraudulent side of it, right? To
Sure.
see what to look for. Can you add a little bit onto that as well?
Yeah, so anytime there's a new data point of any kind, Anura is collecting it, right? We'll constantly look for new data points that are available through different browser versions and devices. And any time that there's a new data point that can be used for something, we collect it, we back test it, we do all kinds of stuff to see what kind of information we can learn from it. And then if it gets included in a rule of 2 or 3 or some of the heuristics that we're looking for in Anura. So I personally can't think of anything else you could add. The nice thing is if you're using Trusted Form Engine Naya, you've got your compliancy for making sure all the stuff is where it's supposed to be, where the lead's coming from, and then using Anura to ensure the person that's filling out the form is a real person. I mean, I can't imagine anything more, you know, ironclad than that on a form.
I mean, there are vendor solutions to check, for instance, like Infutor or others, to whether or not that phone number matches the subscriber, right?
That's after the
so
fact,
you want to use your e-bureau or whatever appends you've got to make sure that these data elements match your consumer, because that's another huge area of risk. And it can be an indicator of fraud, I think, Rich. It isn't necessarily, but I think it can be.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap this up. I really appreciate you guys' time, Eric, Rich. We are going to be sending a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar along with the deck and contact information. So if you guys want to reach out to Eric and Rich, that information will be included. Thank you so much, guys, for taking the time. Hope you all enjoyed it, and have a great rest of the day.
Great.
Thanks. I'm not sure.